well, thank you.
Good morning.
To meet you. Yes, hi.
So, today I would like to talk with you about yourself, to listen to your background, to get to know you better. And I won't tell anything about you because I want you to introduce yourself.
All right.
First of all. So,
Okay. Well, my name is Graham Bancroft. I was born in Yorkshire, and a long time ago, over 60 years ago, let me put it like that. And what I do at the moment is I'm a teacher of English as a foreign language, particularly IELTS preparation courses, because I capitalise on the fact that I used to be an IELTS examiner, and I travelled all over the UK doing that job, examining candidates for the IELTS exam, both for the speaking test and marking their scripts for the writing exam. But of course, before I became an IELTS examiner, I had another career. I worked in computers for many years, and generally speaking, throughout my life, I've done an awful lot of jobs outside teaching. But say, I only came to teaching about 25 years ago, roughly, and I've been doing it ever since full time. But sometimes I mix it up a little bit with computers, because most candidates, most students do require some computer assistance in the schools that they attend, where they're studying the language.
Graham, how many languages do you know?
Well, I learnt the first language I was curious about was German, and I was about 8 or 9 years old when I learned that. But then I started formally learning French at school when I was 11, and French still is my main foreign language, because when I was doing my computer science degree, French was almost 30 or 40% of the curriculum time, and for the third year of the course I actually had to go to a French-speaking country and employ the French that I'd learned in a technical environment, and I ended up working at CERN in Geneva as a technical student for 1 year. So Italian also and Spanish I speak quite well, and I can understand them because they're Latin languages. German is closer to English, so my main two languages are English and French and German in Europe, but I also speak Arabic because I've spent about 8 years of my life in the Arabic world.
Okay.
But not much Russian at the moment. I'm still learning.
Do you know a lot of bad words in French?
Bien sûr, parce que j'ai passé des années là-bas, mais je ne peux pas utiliser tout de suite ces mauvais mots. Mais oui, je sais comment jurer en français, c'est quand même nécessaire.
Now, Graham, where is your hometown? And when is your birthday?
All right, well, my birthday is the 14th of January, and my hometown is Harrogate in Yorkshire, a small spa town. But that was where I was born. It's not really my hometown. The hometown where I live in the UK when I return to the UK is Oxford in the south. But Harrogate is the town that I was born in, and every year, like for example this year when I was briefly back in the UK for a few months, I visited Harrogate. But of course it's changed like everywhere else. The hospital where I was born is long demolished.
Okay. Now, what is your favorite city in England or in Great Britain?
Well, it depends really. In terms of historical cities, I feel very attached to Oxford because it's the city that I identify with. That's where I went to school, and that's where I passed my formative years. But for an exciting city, for an evening's entertainment, cultural entertainment, real entertainment, I prefer London, because London really is one of the greatest cities in the world, without any doubt. It's also, unfortunately though, one of the most expensive cities in the world. No doubt about that. Okay.
Could you show us the difference in accents in, for example, Wales?
Well, I mean, if I was a Londoner, mate, I'd speak like that, see? All relaxed, like, you know what I mean? You've been to London, ain't you, mate?
Yeah.
You knows London well, don't you?
I do?
Yeah, you've been there, of course you have.
Of course,
yeah. But
is it Cockney?
Yes, that's a Cockney accent, roughly.
Okay, can you explain for people what is Cockney? In 2 words.
Cockney really is the local accent of working people who were born in London.
Okay.
And to be a real Cockney, you have to be born within hearing distance of what we call Bow Bells. Because London still is a city with so many churches, and each bell tone has a distinct sound. Let's imagine Big Ben. Everyone knows that. That's the international side of London. But of course, the City of London has many churches in the East End. The Cockney was born in the East End of London, or very close to the East End.
Can you go on with the accents?
Well, what kind of accent
Irish?
would you like me to do now? That's not an Irish accent I'm doing now. What kind of accent is that? That's a Scottish accent, right? Okay.
So
Glasgow,
Scotland.
for example, the big industrial city.
Glasgow.
But I can also do Edinburgh, which is a lot more cultured.
Edinburgh, from Ireland, no?
Do you want an Irish accent here from Dublin? Well, I can do that quite easily. It's not the real thing. It's a bit theatrical, but I can do it. No problem at all.
Liverpool, Manchester.
Oh, well, Liverpool's as if you've got your hand over your nose all the time like that. And John Lennon used to speak a bit like that, didn't he? Yeah.
Okay. Now, I will always wondered, I'm not a big fan of history, but in terms of countries inside the United Kingdom, why do you have Republic of Ireland and just Ireland?
Well,
in
this
the
is.
UK?
I don't want to be too political, Nurzhan, but you know that Ireland became a republic just over 100 years ago. We had what we call the Easter Rising in 1916, and Ireland became a republic, except for 6 counties in the north, which wanted to remain part of the UK. But Ireland became a republic in 1922. In the end, it became a republic quite easily, but the Easter Rising of 1916 was quite severely punished, in that the rebels who held out in the post office in O'Connell Street, Dublin, were all executed immediately by firing squad. Normally the way we used to do it in Britain, we don't do it anymore, was by hanging them, but they were executed by firing squad because it was treated as a military court-martial almost.
Okay.
But Ireland has been a republic almost 100 years, and it's a great republic. I like very much going to Ireland.
Yeah, I heard that the nature is beautiful. Now, another question. How can you tell us what is the typical day of a British person?
Well, I'm not typical as
middle class.
Oh, middle class. Well, they get up in the morning and they have a full breakfast and they meet the family and they see the children off to school, the father I mean, then the father leaves to work in a car, and then the mother, she probably has her own car, she takes the kids to school, and this causes enormous traffic jams and the country stops moving for about an hour. And then she comes home and maybe has a coffee morning with her friends, the father's working. In the evening, the mother goes back and picks up the children for school and creates another huge traffic jam. And then the father is maybe working overtime. He can stay away from home as long as he likes. But the mother of the house, when she's met her friends, she cooks tea for the children when they get home from school.
At 5 o'clock.
And then, 5 o'clock normally. And then when the husband gets home, if he's working overtime, they have, for example, the evening meal. And we don't eat the evening meal too late. It's between 6 and 7 normally. And then typically we finish off the day watching television and the children go to bed. That's the middle class stereotype day, I would say.
Okay.
But
thanks.
I'm not middle class and I'm not married, so
we'll talk about you right now.
All right, okay.
So, let's talk about your work.
Okay.
So, you used to be an IELTS examiner.
Yes.
That's the most interesting part for the most audience, I guess.
Yeah.
So, can you describe your job?
Well, as an IELTS examiner, the job that I did involved a lot of travel, first of all. Not so much when I was doing it in Chile and Oman, because then again, but in Oman I would still have to travel to the site, quite a distance. I would drive myself. In Chile, of course, I lived in the city of Santiago, which is a big city with good public transport. So I was advised that I'd be on an examining session at the weekend on Saturday, and so I'd get public transport, and I'd have about, 10 or 11 candidates. Now, when I came back from Chile in 2014, I was employed immediately by mobile testing services, which meant that I had to travel a long way. For example, I had to travel from Oxford to Nottingham, to Newcastle, to Portsmouth, to Manchester, to Birmingham, several cities. So I would rely on driving myself in my own car, and that's the reason I bought a car, because it meant that I'd be paid travel expenses. And then I'd get to the centre. I'd then start preparing. I'd be given the number of candidates, all on forms. I'd then start selecting for them what particular topics I was going to give them, both for the first 3 frames of section 1.
So it's a speaking exam?
Yes, for the speaking exam. And the long turn, and then don't forget section 3 is always a function of the long turn. But all examiners have to do that before the candidates arrive. So it's all pre-planned. So for the candidate who's coming on next, you always know what you're going to give them.
Okay.
So that's what I did in the UK. So it was quite busy. There was a lot of travel, and then I'd spend the overnight. If I was going to Manchester, I'd claim on expenses a hotel stay, because when I finished examining, if I had 20, it'd be late on Saturday evening by the time I'd finished.
And for how long have you been working as a speaking examiner?
Well, I first qualified, actually. I did this certification in Dubai in 2008. So I've been doing it I did it on and off, but latterly I did it more on. But initially I would never go for the full 2 years because I travelled and then I lost the thread. But the last qualification, which finished in 2015, because I qualified in 2013, so my 2 years was up in 2015, I was doing it fairly regularly. So it was, but it's not a full-time job, Nurzhan. Don't forget, it's only weekends. So I had to supplement that with a driving job, which I did in the UK.
Oh, you did a driving job?
Yes, I did, and I still am interested in that kind of driving job, and even manual labour. I'll still be ready to do that at any time.
And what is the main function of an examiner? You said that yesterday. You said that a person who is watching the listening and reading exam, who is checking the answers, he's not an examiner. It can be another person.
Well, the listening and reading are marked by a clerical team, and of course examiners.
A clerical team.
Okay. And they meet, of course, because both the listening and the reading are corrected after the candidates have done it a few days later.
Who are they?
Well, they're normally trained by, for example, International House, where I did most of my examining. They were responsible for monitoring, because don't forget, examiners for the speaking and the reading are monitored regularly.
International House.
Yes, International House is a big language chain.
Interpress.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they are also in Interpress here in Kazakhstan. But of course, their big offices are in London and they receive many students. So they're responsible for monitoring examiners.
Are they young people?
Yes, they can be quite young.
Okay.
But all ages. You see, there's no age limit for examining.
Now,
basically,
the main question: how to become an examiner?
Well, you don't have to be a native speaker. In fact, you can become an examiner if you're a speaker of another language. But of course, you're expected, if you're not a native speaker of English, to be able to get IELTS 8 or 9, and you have to prove it.
C2.
And it has to be within 2 years. I have to say that not many candidates get 9, but many candidates are capable of getting 8. But if you're a native speaker, then you have an interview, and they want to go into your background, and you have to fill in a very long application form. Then that's not all. If you're accepted, you have to then go and be trained on a 2-weekend course. The first weekend is quite intensive. It's the speaking normally. The second weekend is the writing, and then at the end of both weekend, you have to certify. That means you have to grade a certain number of past IELTS papers, or in the writing, or if it's the speaking, you listen to the recorded interview, and you have to give them an IELTS band, which is within half a band compared to what their previous examiner gave them. If you're out, you're re-invited, and you can take the exam again.
Okay. So, how do you assess the writing section for writing task 1 and writing task 2? Task 1 is not that interesting for us. Task 2, the essay. Are there 3 persons who check the one essay, or only 1 or 2 persons?
Well, it all depends, Nurzhan, actually. I would say that task 1, first of all, you made the point about task 1. It is a little bit less important, but all candidates should attempt both tasks.
Yeah.
You can't get the band you require by ignoring one of the tasks. You have to allot a certain part of the outer task 1. There are 4 criteria for both tasks: grammatical range and accuracy, lexical resource, fluency and cohesion, and pronunciation for the speaking test. The band descriptors are confidential, but they're a little bit different for task 1 and task 2. For the writing, we have, again, the 4 criteria, but 2 of them have changed somewhat.
Coherence, cohesion.
Fluency and cohesion has changed in the writing to cohesion and coherence. Pronunciation has been changed to task achievement or task response. So these are the 4 criteria on which the examiners will grade a candidate's paper or speaking performance after the candidate has left in the speaking.
What about the levels of English or any other European language? There is an organization, and they are called CEFR,
yes,
right?
The Common European Framework. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, this runs from A1, A2, B1, B2, and C1 and C2. There are 6 levels for all European languages.
Okay. So if I have scored IELTS twice, my first time was 6.5, second time was 7.5. So 6.5 is B2.
Yes.
7.5 is C1.
Yes.
Is it called a native-like speaker?
Yes. If you're obtaining IELTS 8, then for all intents and purposes, you are native speaker level. I have to say, Nurzhan, that not many candidates ever receive a 9 overall. It's very difficult.
9,
8.5. But
Year and a
these
half?
are not common results. These are reserved, as we say in French, for la crème de la crème. You've got to be,
Extraordinary.
even I, as a native speaker, it wouldn't be guaranteed that if I took the entire IELTS exam, I'd get an overall 9. No.
Yeah, because you should have a special talent of writing.
Yes. And
essay.
your listening, you have to get 36 out of 40 to get a 9. Because don't forget the
36?
speaking. Don't forget the listening and the reading are linear scores. So you know, whatever total, every question of the 40 on both of those papers is worth exactly 1 point. So if you say there are 10 levels, roughly every 4 points you go up a band on the speaking and on the reading and the listening.
Okay. Now we have been talking about the format, and it was pretty interesting for, I don't know, a lot of time. Now let's change the topic, and I'd like to talk about your teaching experience. I know that you have been teaching in many different countries all over the world. Can you tell us the most interesting things, the parts of the world where you've been teaching, and different cultures and people?
Well, I think the Arab world is a sizable proportion of my teaching career, because if you add it all up together, 5 years in Morocco plus another 3 in various other Arab countries in Africa and the Gulf, that is really quite special. And in terms of IELTS, of course, every culture has its strong points and its weak points. I think for Arabic speakers, the main problem is for writing and the reading. The listening and the speaking, particularly the speaking for Arab learners, are much better. For Chinese learners, it's the mirror image. They find speaking difficult, and their pronunciation scores on the speaking test tend to be quite low. But of course, they're very structured when it comes to the reading and the writing in particular.
Reading and writing?
Yes, the reading and the writing in particular, you can almost tell an Oriental candidate by the size of their writing and its neatness, and the style of the writing is quite comprehensive. They're not so good about giving their opinion. Don't forget, in writing task 2, very often it asks you to give your opinion. Shall we say Oriental, Chinese, Japanese, etc., are not very Koreans also are not so keen to give their opinion, but you must give it if you're asked. South Americans generally are very laid back and very relaxed, and you know, as in many cultures, I feel qualified to say this, their levels of punctuality are not so high.
Punctuality.
So you know, when you travel, you are able to recognise certain candidates.
That's why we are similar to Latin Americans. Kazakh nation.
Really?
And yeah.
I don't have enough experience in order to base my opinion, Nurzhan, but if you say so. But I think that's a good thing. I don't think we can't all be the same. We in Britain are not so intense. The German-speaking world really is the part of the world where I think punctuality is the most important. But we are probably in the top 5, viewed from the outsiders. I don't consider myself to be punctual, but when I analyse my behaviour, for example, getting to the IELTS centre on time, I suppose I am punctual, and I know that people might judge me if I'm not punctual. I have to be there and have it all prepared and ready to go. And I think most examiners have to behave, have to work like that. You've got to be punctual.
Of course, I was about to ask you about the Kazakhstan, your overall experience in teaching here, and what do you think about the country, the city in general?
Okay, well, I started off teaching in Kazakhstan really absolute beginners with virtually no English at all. And because I didn't have any Russian to speak of, I have a little bit more now, but in those days I didn't have any. So I thought it was unfair to expect the teacher to give the course in Russian, because that's going back to the old ways of grammar translation approach to languages. Obviously, when you're teaching a living language such as English, you should use it from the very beginning with absolute beginners. But when I moved from that town I was working in to Almaty here, I discovered that learners were much more sophisticated, and it wasn't only English language they were interested in, it was the American college program series of exams like GMAT, for example, and the SAT. And because of my scientific computer background, I was able to teach those quite successfully. So you see, I have quite a wide range, and I think this appeals to Kazakhstan because you are a very big country. You're the biggest landlocked country in the world, so I think there's lots of diversity, particularly in the provinces on the steppe. But here in Almaty, I think, you have a much more sophisticated, innately capable kind of learner who's really exam orientated, and they see, many candidates here, the importance of obtaining a good IELTS score.
You were talking about the level of English.
Yes, I would say the level here in Almaty is really quite high. Not everyone speaks it, but for those who have already been to a university, either here in Kazakhstan or in the English-speaking world, they have a much a higher level, and they're capable of continuing the course where English is used as the meta language, is what we call it. The meta language is how you explain the course, and of course that is much more motivating for teachers generally.
Yeah, I would agree with this, because personally I think that our generation, the young Kazakhstan, young people, we try to learn more.
Yes.
And do more things in English.
Sure. Yes. Of course
IT technologies, digital marketing.
Yes.
All these things.
Yeah.
In trend, they are all in English.
Yes. Sure.
Yeah.
So for that reason, tuition in English to a certain level, to prove your level, either to employ here or to enter into a university here in Almaty, or to go abroad, the United States also, I think the IELTS is becoming the norm. And it's desirable to have at least 6.5. If you have 7 or 7.5,
we also need IELTS here.
Yes. Yes. Yep. You do.
Several universities like KIMAP,
yes,
Nazarbayev University.
Yes. And of course I have to say, because IELTS tests the 4 skills, nothing really is omitted. Previous exams probably omitted a great deal in terms of speaking and writing in particular, because the 4 skills, the 2 productive and the 2 receptive, are necessary for any kind of academic career. You must be able to listen to understand English, but also you must be able to write and to read, because reading is the base of further education. You must read.
Do you mean previous exams before IELTS?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I'm not going to give their names, Nurzhan, but I think you know to what I'm alluding.
And now, what would be your suggestion for what kind of level should the student have to start preparing for IELTS?
Well, I think a B2 is probably desirable.
B2?
Yes. If they're a very good B1, maybe, but they have to be prepared if they're only B1 to learn a lot more, particularly in terms of lexis, of vocabulary.
Exactly.
If you're B2 or C1, then that would probably be the ideal. Then with preparation, I stress at least 1 preparation course, but as many as is necessary, you should be able to reach the 6.5.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling my
If
students.
you don't, well, do it again.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think you should be encouraged to do IELTS again and retrain and concentrate on that IELTS individual score of the 4 that was the weakest, and try and build it up, because that's the score that's depressing your average.
Now, what about those students who think that they can pass the IELTS exam successfully without any preparation? If they have, let's say, if they finish the advanced courses of English,
yes,
or if they lived in English-speaking country for a long time, they came back in Kazakhstan, they know good English, they have good command of English.
Well,
what do you think about those people who don't prepare?
Let's talk briefly about people who've been in English-speaking countries. They always come back with an accent, an informal, what I call baggage. Don't forget the IELTS is an academic exam. So you must speak, and certainly, particularly, you must write academically. You can't adopt, shall we say, informal English. Like you can't say kids instead of children. You can't say mate instead of friend.
Yeah.
You can't say workmate instead of colleague, for example. You should actually know that this is an academic exam. But if you do fail, I think you really need to retrain and concentrate, as I said, on the skill that's letting you down. But certainly, I mean, if you've been in English-speaking countries, then still further preparation for IELTS is necessary, because if you've lived in an English-speaking country and worked, for example, you've never taken IELTS, then you have to really prepare for the academic language. Don't forget, IELTS exists in 2 forms. There's the academic and the general training.
Yeah.
But I think both of them insist on a certain level of academic English.
Do you agree with this saying that a person who knows English worse than another person but has prepared better, he can achieve a higher score than the person that knows English better, the general English?
Well, I think generally speaking, IELTS is far more indicative, your IELTS score is far more indicative of your overall level of English. Now, other exams, which are popular in the as a test of English as a foreign language, perhaps put the emphasis too much on exam technique and developing that. I think IELTS, because you have to write your own prose, and you have to read and answer more intelligent questions, and you certainly have to speak. I think all these are far more indicative. If you perform well in IELTS, you're generally able to converse and write and read in English far more effectively. So I think it's an integrated exam, because every skill is tested and each skill is treated as being equally important.
So yes or no?
What was your question then?
The question was the person who is better prepared but knows English worse than the other person, is it true that he can achieve a higher score than that person who knows English better but wasn't prepared for the exam?
Well, I think yes. Basically, everyone should prepare for IELTS. If you're good at English, you can't just go into IELTS and expect to get the score without training, without preparation. Preparation courses are highly effective because they focus on what you're supposed to do. So, but the ideal candidate, Nurzhan, will be someone who's got a good level of English and is academically inspired and has got the time and the patience to do a training course.
Yeah.
Then they can get 6.5 and up, 7 and up, 7.5.
I have no doubt about it.
Good.
Okay. Now, there was something new in IELTS world when they added UKVI,
Yeah.
life skills.
Mm-hmm.
Is it called?
Yes.
For UK visa or for students who want to enroll documents to British universities?
Yes. Well, UKVI, I should explain, is the immigration wing of the Home Office of the British Ministry of the Interior. We call it the Home Office in Britain. Now, candidates are usually married to a British citizen, and they want to get a passport. Now, this is just the check to make sure that their level of English is satisfactory. It's rather different from the IELTS, the life skills exam, in that there are two candidates and one examiner. As you know, in the IELTS, the straight IELTS, the classical IELTS, there's one candidate, one examiner. Now, the two candidates, it's also a little bit longer and it's graded. If you're A1, you take one version. If you're A2, you take another. And if you're B1 level on the CEFR, then you take yet another level. So there are 3 distinct levels. And generally speaking, the exam takes longer than the 14 minutes that normally IELTS lasts. Also, the candidates in front of the examiner have to perform a communicative task, and there is a listening element, which the examiner, sometimes it's a bit more difficult for the examiner, because the examiner has to cue the CD, the digital recorder, so that it works immediately. So there's a lot more to do, but while the two candidates are performing the task, the examiner can more or less relax and observe how they do the task and analyse the language they're using and mark them according to 6 levels. So this again I have practice in, but I should explain, Begzod, that I'm not examining any, neither life skills or IELTS. Nurzhan, I'm not examining that anymore.
Okay. Now, what is the main difference between academic module and general training in IELTS?
Well, I have to tell you that the speaking and the listening, of course, are exactly the same exam, and very often in an exam session the majority are taking academic, but there will always be a small minority. In about 100, it's roughly about 10%, I would say, who are taking general training in the same exam room for the listening exam, for the written exam. So the difference is slight. For the writing, task 1 is not deciphering a graph and writing about it. It's writing a letter. Generally speaking, it is somewhat easier, but of course it's not the academic.
Yeah, right.
The difference is in the reading. There are rather more texts and they're a little bit shorter. So there are more than 3.
More text?
There are more texts, yes, but that's shorter and a little bit more straightforward for the general training. But it's only 50% of the exam that is slightly different.
Okay.
The listening.
They don't change.
Yeah, speaking is listening.
Okay.
Exactly the same.
Good. Now, what is IELTS for you in general? Like, what kind of role does this exam play in your role? Is it really important? Is it a big part of your life?
Well, not as big as it used to be, because I don't examine. But of course, it's very convenient and pleasant for me to teach IELTS preparation, because I feel that examiners can tell potential candidates things that they probably can't get from other teachers who know about IELTS but have never experienced it in a practical way, such as I have. So I think many examiners do become teachers. Well, we have to be teachers actually to qualify examiners in the first place. That's the ideal background for a candidate who wants to be an examiner. They have to have had a long time in the classroom to be able to assess a student's writing and a student's speaking.
What is IELTS? What is IELTS for candidates?
Well, I think it's the ultimate challenge.
Ultimate challenge, first of all?
Yes, it's the ultimate challenge in your level of English. And compared to other exams, I mean, there are many other exams. I'm not being pejorative to these other exams, but IELTS is better suited for a university career, or, for example, it's better suited for being promoted in your job, because jobs generally, you see, learning a language is not only about speaking. some nationalities, I'm not going to mention which ones, think that that's true, and speaking is important, but of course reading and writing and listening are equally important. So IELTS really is the only exam that has an integrated approach where every skill is equally important. So I think candidates, language students in general, should, particularly if they're studying English for their job, should ultimately think about IELTS. But as we said, in the CEFR, you have to be at least, shall we say, B2.
So you said,
or
first
C1.
of all,
B1, depending on the advice you're given from your teacher.
First of all, it's an ultimate challenge.
Yes.
Secondly, it's like a big door which,
Yes.
which can be opened.
Yeah. And when the door's opened, of course, you can progress and you can travel. And if you want to ever settle in an English-speaking country, then you can take the life skills exam, which will legalise you. Even though you might find a partner or a spouse even who's a subject or a citizen of that English-speaking country, you still have to take life skills to get your own passport.
Now, do you remember any extraordinary things that happened during the exam when you were an examiner?
Not really. I mean, there are stories of speaking examiners who have candidates who become emotional, but I think the subjects for speaking are always chosen in that there's nothing that's emotionally active and can create a can create a strong emotion in the
Can
candidate.
be offensive. Nothing can be offensive, right?
Not really. What has happened, not in my examining career, but sometimes a fire alarm might go off, and so the speaking exam has to be immediately suspended. The examiner has to switch off the recording. Of course, every speaking exam has to be recorded. So, and then, of course, then normally you come back and start it again if the alert is given, if the all clear is given, if it was a false alarm, for example.
Okay.
Sometimes there can be a power cut also, so everything stops because your recording stops.
Yeah.
Sometimes in a speaking exam, the batteries can give out without warning, but good examiners always check the batteries and have replacement batteries just in case that happens, because recording the exam is always the examiner's responsibility. And if for any reason the exam is not recorded satisfactorily, then the exam has to be given again. So it's in everyone's interest that happens pretty soon during the same session. But as I say, it's never happened to me. Once when I was working as an invigilator, a candidate was asked to leave because they were not really doing anything constructive. They were looking furtively around them. Yep. Now, don't forget, cheating is a big issue in IELTS, or what used to be. It's more or less been eliminated now. Okay, fair enough.
Now, you were talking about the speaking. Is it true that the mark is the candidate is marked as soon as he leaves the room?
In the speaking exam, yes, the examiner is not permitted to actually mark and record things about the candidate while the candidate is speaking. They must look at the candidate and they must give the candidate all their attention, and they should encourage, within the limits of the rules, they should encourage a candidate as much as they possibly can.
No, the question is the examiner for speaking is responsible for marking?
Yes. Only that examiner can mark a speaking candidate, but only when the candidate has left the room.
Okay, but in this case, why do they need recordings?
Well, recordings are necessary for a double check. Now, some candidates have what we call a jagged profile. This means that the gap is more than 2 bands, for example, between their writing performance and their speaking performance. Now, when that happens normally, candidates, they're listened to again by a different examiner who's completely unaware of the grade that the first speaking examiner is given as a double check. Yes, this systematically happens. Also, it can happen when, well, I think that's the only instance in which it can happen.
Okay.
But I've only done that once in my examining career. I had to listen to recordings, and without knowing what the first examiner gave, on the form in the space will put a band in for the second examiner.
Was it
But
different?
you don't see the first examiner's mark. It's gone.
What do you think about cheating in IELTS? Is it possible?
Well, I would say that's virtually impossible today, because certainly in UKVI centres for the life skills, there is top security. Candidates have to make a statement, and they have to say that they are the candidate they say they are. And then, of course, during the speaking and, of course, all the written exams, both well, not for life skills, because life skills is only, everything's integrated into one session. But for standard IELTS, in the written exams, invigilators must go round and check the passport number and make sure that it agrees with their name, and they don't get their number on the exam paper, but the names must be the same.
Is it dangerous to cheat?
I would say so. Yes, so you can. But you can even, you see, when we talk about cheating, we mean, besides sending a proxy candidate, someone who looks like you, which has happened in the past, doesn't happen anymore. But cheating, for example, is not stopping writing in the writing exam or the reading exam when time is called. You must put your pencils down straight away.
No. I mean, what consequences can face the candidate if he is caught cheating?
Well, you won't get a result. Your result will be cancelled, and I don't really know what happens. That's up for the centre, the administration of the centre, to decide. Maybe the candidate won't be allowed to take it within a certain time.
Or maybe he can be forbidden for visa. No?
I don't think it's that strong. Well, the visa application, it won't get as far if any. But for life skills, because it's communicative and two candidates have to do a task, then it's almost impossible to cheat. I would say that about IELTS generally these days.
What about those people who work in the system, like the administrators?
Well, of course, yes. You
taking
see,
money for
yes.
fraud.
Well, examiners, of course, have to sign an agreement on confidentiality. Now, for centre managers, people who work in the administration, they are in a position of very great trust. And so I think if you want to work in that system, you have to have a thorough background check.
But if they disobey the law?
Well, I think that they deserve then to have the law applied to their particular case.
And to be sentenced to prison.
Yes, possibly as an extreme case, Nurzhan. But certainly, I think they will be debarred. Don't forget, examiners, if their performance is consistently bad, they can be banned from examining for life.
Yeah.
They can never be re-employed by any centre in any part of the world as an examiner again. Don't forget, the quality control for examiners is quite high. Having qualified as an examiner, you have to recertify at the end of 2 years. No one can do it for life without jumping over the hurdle of the certification again, both for writing and for speaking.
Now, I would like to conclude our interview with your piece of advice for a candidate who is intending to pass IELTS soon. Just tell the person some tips general tips. Well,
I would say the first big tip I would give is don't expect to go to IELTS with any kind of familiarity about the exam. Undertake a training course, or as many training courses as you need. Select carefully the school that's running it to make sure that your teacher, even if they can't be a past examiner, they know sufficiently about the exam to be able to give you really relevant tips for it. The second thing is wait, be patient, don't expect Rome wasn't built in a day. You have to attain B2 ideally, maybe B1, reach the level, and then prepare for it adequately, and don't be disappointed if you don't make the grade, because if you don't make the grade, you can go back and repeat it.
Yeah.
And of course, but having said that, I've seen some candidates will keep doing it again and again, like every 2 weeks. Don't do that. If you failed for any reason, then take a break, go to an English-speaking country if you're not already in one, and if it's your speaking that was at fault, learn some more idiomatic expressions. Or if it's your reading, then start reading for pleasure. Read things that interest you in English. Use the internet. Yes, you must expand your vocabulary. This is very often the case of failure in the reading and the speaking, because their lexical resource is not worth a 6 even.
Okay.
So these are the tips I can give. Keep at it, and always be, shall we say, motivated by the necessity to do most of your international work in English. And don't forget that many international companies have imposed English as the working language in all countries.
Okay.
I think those are the major tips I could give.
Fair enough. Now, thank you, Graham, for coming.
Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you too, sir.
Okay.